Be careful.
He's and Scott Higgins, both of them coked up out of their minds.
Listen to you. He's down in the basement. Yeah. Oh, I love that.
I think we should call this the Acement.
The Acement, yes.
Yeah, what do you think there, huh?
I like that. The Acement Studios.
Excuse me, I'm drinking beer. Hold on a second.
We usually drink bourbon on our end when we do the podcast, so
that's all right.
Feel free to enjoy yourself.
Yeah, exactly. You shoot an 8-ball if you want. We don't care, as long as it's good stories.
And welcome to the Acement, everybody. It's time to go behind the funny. This is Scott Higgins.
And this is Ace Aceto.
And we are live once again. Thank you all of you. Back. We're back.
Feels like it's been forever.
Yes, it has. We have done so much work the last couple of weeks.
It's more work than when we have guests. Just pulling clips for the best of shows is
guests
ridiculous.
Are so much fun because we get to chat, we get to hang out, we get to have a good time. End of the year, we decide to always do these best of the year retrospectives, which we love doing. We love going back through the year and pulling the clips and putting together all the stuff. But it's a lot of work.
Oh, my God.
It is so much work.
We thought it was going to be 3 episodes, and then we realized we had so much content from Scottober with our paranormal theme that, we had to pull like 2 or 3 clips. I mean, Jason Hawes from Ghost Hunters was on. We had his daughter and her, her boyfriend, the paranormal couple.
Not my favorite episode.
Yeah, that was
not my favorite episode.
It was so much fun. So we ended up pulling a ton of clips from those, and
so that became its own episode.
That was the 4th episode. Yeah. Exactly. So
So we thank you guys so much. For tuning in all these past weeks. The Best of the Funny Bad Gigs launched it all. You guys. Again, downloads were up for that one. That's always one of our most popular episodes. And you guys, once again, plenty of downloads on that one. That's one of our favorites to put together. Yeah. I love listening to the Best of the Funny Bad Gigs.
Absolutely.
And
but we're glad to be back live.
Yes. This is what we love to do. And we're back, and we're going to start 2022 with a bang.
Yes, we are. And we're so excited. So first of all, really quick, we just want to thank our bourbon date. We went back to our girl, Angel's Envy, because we love her.
She treats us so well.
So Clinkies, here's to 2022.
2022.
But we're really excited because this guy reached out to us and reached out to Scott, right?
Yes.
Yep. And then, when I started looking him up, I'm like, oh my God, we need to talk to this guy.
Yes.
So Art Bell, he has a great story to tell, so I don't want to take too much thunder. But if you've ever heard of something called Comedy Central, or the Comedy Channel.
It's run through my universe once or twice.
Heard of it once or twice. He's the guy. If it wasn't for him, it wouldn't exist. So
right.
So we have him to thank or blame, depending on your
depending on how you look at it.
Depending on your viewpoint. No, I have him to thank because I want to talk to him about my first experience with it.
Yes.
So without further ado, we want to welcome Art Bell to the Behind the Funny Studios in the Acement. Art, welcome.
Hey, great to be here, guys.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We really appreciate you coming on and reaching out. And we know that you're battling a little bit of laryngitis or cold or
forgive me on that.
Plague.
No, please
listen.
We went through several weeks, Art, where if you go back, anybody that's been listening to our podcast knows Ace for 5 episodes in a row.
At least 5 weeks. I had no voice.
Virtually no voice.
Really?
You know what it actually took to get my voice back?
What?
I got COVID. I got
true.
COVID.
Really?
It forced me to stop because during the day I work in medical sales and at night I do comedy. And so I never stopped talking, which never gave my voice a rest. Once I got COVID, I had 4 or 5 days where I just drank tea and didn't talk. And it finally got, it finally knocked it out and it came back.
That's the first time I've heard thank goodness for COVID.
I know, right? Yeah.
It was a little weird the way you put that. But
I didn't mean to say it like that, but
it worked out in this case.
Yes.
But anyway, Art's got a book out for those of you that haven't heard. We did mention earlier, Constant Comedy, a memoir, how I started Comedy Central and lost my sense of humor. And that's why we wanted to have him on, because that is a great title of a book.
Yes.
So we wanted to kind of dig into your past art. Now, to go back a little bit further before you got there, were you did you ever do stand-up comedy at all? Or were you just kind of a fan that, always wanted to work in stand-up?
Always a fan. And I did sketch comedy, amazingly enough.
Okay.
When I was in college and high school, and in grad school, I wrote what was called The Follies. It was a student or a student-run performance, musical comedy, and it reminded me how much I loved comedy, because I loved writing comedy. I did write a lot of comedy stuff when I was in high school and college.
Okay. And then where did you grow up?
The Jersey Shore.
Oh, really?
Yeah, Bruce
East Coast
Springsteen was a
guy,
local bar band when I was a local bar fly.
Yeah.
And he was great. It was great to have him there. And going to the beach every day, man, you can't beat that for growing up.
No,
exactly. That's a rough youth to have, going to the beach every day and listening to Bruce Springsteen at night. That's a tough existence.
Bruce Springsteen, Eastside Johnny.
Yeah.
Was he big back then as well? Eastside Johnny.
Eastside Johnny was big back then. Crazy Davy and the Mission Man. You know that song?
I've heard that. Yeah.
You're right. Crazy Davy Anderson lived across the street from me when I was a kid.
Really?
But he was the coolest guy on earth. Of course, he didn't make it to the big band, but
yeah. Well,
Good
still that's someone that
cool.
you look up to.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah.
And then, so you grew up on the Jersey Shore. You went to
Right.
college. What did you major in college?
Economics and English.
Wow. Totally
I
different.
know,
from
yeah,
comedy.
right down the middle for comedy, right?
Yeah,
I was going to
right.
say a lot of funny stuff came out of economics, because I majored in economics too. So, obviously there's a
So
link
you
there.
know.
Yeah, I only
exactly.
took one economics class, and it was an Indian guy. And all I remember from his entire
It's
class,
so true.
all I remember from his class was guns and butter, and how you would never think they would be related, but by the end of the class, you somehow understood how they're dependent on each other. And I don't know, guns and butter.
You guys know Father Guido Sarducci's bit on
Yeah, Don
5 Minute
Novella.
University.
What
You know,
was it?
when he says a 5-minute university, he says, you only have to remember certain things from your education. So
Yeah.
I got a 5-minute university, and economics, supply and a demand.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's all it was.
That's all it was. We just did that over and over.
Yeah, you just have to quote that, and it's all about supply and demand. And people go, "Yep, he took economics."
Right.
That's all you got to say.
That's all you got to know. Yeah, I people always hear, and I will throw in that my first job out of college was in economics. I was an economist, and people always say, "Oh man, that's too bad. You had to be an economist for a while. That's terrible." I loved economics.
It's a great job.
Yeah.
I loved economics. I thought it was so hard. It was the first test I took when I went to college, and I got a 17 on it. And I hadn't failed a lot of tests in my life.
Yeah.
And so I thought, geez, I really got to rethink this whole thing. So I worked very hard, and then I found that I liked it. So that's what I did.
So it's kind of weird. We're talking about economics. Where does the gravitation towards comedy come from a career as an economist?
It doesn't. Actually, it doesn't.
I was going to say, I'm trying to connect the dots, and there's not a direct line there.
There is not a direct line, but you are going to be surprised when I tell the story about how I ended up doing all this.
Yeah, and that's what
Please.
Economics
that's what we wanna
does
hear.
come into play, and that's a very important thing. No, I started liking comedy when I was at like 8 years old, because
Of course.
I was in a funny family. My kid brother was really funny.
Yeah.
And he ended up doing sketch comedy in New York for like years and years. Very funny. And my father was kind of funny. My mother laughed a lot, but so we were growing
She was
up in
the
a
audience.
we were growing up in a funny household. And then when I was about 8 years old, I started watching the Ed Sullivan Show, which was a weekly variety show.
Yep.
Had all the comedians on. First place I saw Richard Pryor was on his first appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show. So it was just astounding to me
Yep.
how funny that guy was. And not only that, but I thought, man, he's making everybody in the audience laugh. My father's laughing so hard he's crying. And there's probably 30 million people out there in television land who are laughing.
Right.
That's pretty powerful stuff. And I wanted to know more about it. I wanted to be funny.
Yep.
And I wanted to know more about it. So I just became kind of a comedy nerd from that point on.
So you had always been interested in comedy, even if you weren't ingrained in it or doing it.
And I think that's lost on the current generation of youth, how impactful those type of shows were for people that were fans of comedy and for comedians, because, you know, you talk about Ed Sullivan, and we've talked about it with other guests in the past. Like, I used to sneak staying up late to watch Johnny Carson to see who the comedian was, and to listen to their sets and everything like that. And that's what got me interested, you know, as a young kid, because, you know, here I am 11 and 12 years old, and I'm supposed to be in bed to go to school the next day, and I'm sneaking up to who's the comedian on Carson tonight. And it was such a big deal. And now we're just so overwhelmed with online content and everything else that you don't have that same impact anymore with, you know, premiering a stand-up or a new stand-up. And most of the late night shows don't even do it anymore.
Yeah.
You know, Johnny Carson was the stand-up comedy gateway. You had to do Carson. You want to make it in comedy, you had to do Carson. And if you got invited to the couch, that was it, man. You were made.
Right. You were made.
Yeah.
And there's no real kind of analog now, although Saturday Night Live, I always point out, is one of the great brands in comedy. You know, one of the great cultural edifices in comedy, along with Comedy Central.
But it's not the gateway that it used to be.
No, true.
Or that we used to have. I even remember, even before, when you were saying about about Ed Sullivan, you know, it was a variety show. When I was growing up in the early, you know, mid 70s, there were tons of variety shows, Sonny and Cher, Flip Wilson, and they always had comics come on. And,
Smothers Brothers.
Smothers Brothers, exactly.
Unbelievable, that show.
Yeah. And I used to love watching the comedians on there, and that's what made me fall in love with it. I just used to be in awe of guys, you know, I do impressions, so I was in awe of guys like Rich Little and Fred Trevelina.
Yeah.
Fred Trevelina was like the guy, you know? And every time Jerry Lewis would have the telethon, you'd be like, oh my God, I wonder if that guy Fred Trevelina is going to be on. Sure enough, he was on, you know, every year. And
did you do impressions when you were a kid? Did you do impressions?
I did. Yeah, they were horrible impressions. I think my first impression, we actually had one of my best friends on the podcast last year. And we had a tape of me doing impressions when I was like 10 or 11. And I was doing Rosanna Dana, you know, 11-year-old kid. I mean, it was before my voice changed. Not that it changed that much, but yeah, I used to do impressions as a kid as well.
Yeah, me too. I used to do impressions. I was sort of okay on some of them.
Yeah.
But, and you know, just to throw in another reason that I love comedy is because, you know, it was a way I defined myself when I was in school, in high school. You know, I was going to be the funny kid because I sure as hell wasn't the football captain. You know? And
right.
I could not make the team. I couldn't do any of that stuff. And so in order to get the attention of, you know, not only girls, but sort of everybody.
People.
I had people. That's what they're called. I forgot.
It escaped him.
I had to develop my sense of humor, and I noticed early on that if you made people laugh, then they paid attention.
Absolutely, and we talk about that.
Scott said it before. He said that was your superpower, especially if you were getting picked on. If you could make the bullies laugh, you were on. You know, I'll be the court jester for you. That's fine. You know,
it's that moment you realize you could make people laugh when you wanted to, you know, because you'd have those moments in grade school where I'm making people laugh, but it was just me fooling around making people laugh. And then all of a sudden one day I realized I can turn this on and off when I want. And that's when it's like, holy crap. It's almost like having this, you know, superpower, as I called it. Like, you know, if I need to diffuse a situation, I can just flip this switch and go into this funny mode and diffuse the situation if I need to.
Exactly.
If I need everyone's attention, I can get it because I can flip the switch on when I want. Right. And I didn't realize it took me, you know, to like I think junior high almost before I realized this was an on-demand thing that I could have. Unfortunately, throughout the rest of my educational career, I didn't use it for good. I used it for bad, but that was another thing altogether.
Right.
Because I remember many of a parent-teacher conference where my father would have that talk with me afterwards. If you just use this for good instead of evil, where would you be?
Yeah, right.
You know, hey, I got thrown out of class plenty when I was in, you know, high school, junior high, not high school. They don't throw you out of class then, but you know, grade school, junior high, you know, I thought I was being funny. Everybody's laughing. The teacher's laughing. Then she says, okay, go stand in the hall.
Yeah, right. But you were laughing at
But
me
that
5
was
minutes
funny.
ago. I thought you liked
That's
me.
Right, that's the worst when they laugh
know.
and then they have to throw you out because it's their job, but you were just
Right.
laughing.
I know.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that was and when I got to high school, I started getting interested. It's a little off topic, but satire. You know,
Yeah, no.
National Lampoon
Yes.
was the magazine, and of course, at that point, it was being written by the greats. You know, all the great guys who wrote for that thing.
Right.
So funny. And I started an underground newspaper. Well, it wasn't really that underground, but you know, in high school, instead of working for the regular newspaper, I started my own newspaper with some friends called The Tongue, and we wrote satire. We wanted to be the National Lampoon of
That's awesome.
Of the Jersey Shore.
of you know, Lakewood High School. That's where I was, in Lakewood.
Yeah.
And you know, same thing. Teachers loved it, man. They were laughing and everything. We got in trouble.
Yeah,
But
of
you know,
course. Two-faced teachers.
well, because we were making fun of the school. They had something called in-school suspension, for example.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That was,
Oh,
to
yeah.
me, that was the stupidest thing I ever heard. We couldn't believe how dumb that was.
Right. Best part of
In-school
suspension was being
suspension.
able to stay at home.
That's when I love the word oxymoron. Hey, guys, you're not, you know, anyway.
Yeah,
So
right.
it was just stuff like that we're making fun of and writing really kind of interesting and sophisticated stuff, I thought. But then when I got to college, I started hanging out with people who were really funny.
Mhm.
I mean, one of my best friends in college ended up going to Hollywood and writing lots of shows that you've heard of. He started on, and he said, "Hey, Art, I'm going to LA. I'm going to, you know, write comedy." I said, "Nah." Never happened. And you know what? It wasn't because he wasn't funny, because he was,
Yeah.
he still is hysterically funny,
Mhm.
great writer. And we did a lot of funny stuff together in college.
Yeah.
I just thought it was impossible to be, you know, to make a living at comedy.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Because you never think like, you don't think about the fact
Right.
that there are people behind the scenes actually getting paid to write that stuff, or that you
Yeah.
could ever get paid for it. Even us as stand-ups, you know, the first time someone hands you $25 after you've been doing open mic after open mic, and you go, I just did the same thing I did at a free show last night, and you just paid me $25.
You get paid for doing this?
You get paid for doing what you want to do. I got into it to make people laugh, you know?
Well, that's good. You know, that is exactly right. But when I was growing up, you know, in my family, it was either my dad was an accountant, either you were an accountant, a doctor, or a lawyer. After
Yeah.
that, there were no professions, you know. When I told my parents I was going to be an economist, they said, "Well, maybe you should take some bookkeeping to fall back on."
Yes. Oh my God. Being an economist wasn't a big enough job.
So you can imagine that if I had said, "I'm going to LA with my friend Mike and we're going to write comedy," that wouldn't have been well received. I just thought it was impossible.
Right.
Well, maybe 3 years later, he was writing, you know, on Family Ties and
Oh,
Oh wow.
yeah.
Yeah, maybe if you had said, "Hey, I'm going to go, you know, move to LA and work with my friend Mike as a comedy writer," maybe they would have said, "Maybe you should be an economist to fall back on." Then you would have gotten what you wanted.
It would have been something like that. But I, you know, again, I didn't think you could make a living in comedy or television or film until I spent 3 years working as an economist, saying, you know what, as much fun as I'm having, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life.
Right.
And that's when I, you know, sort of changed the channel, as I call it. I went back to school,
Okay.
and with the intention of getting into the TV or film business. And that's what I did.
And what was the first place that you worked at in TV? Was it HBO, or had you done other things before you got there?
No. I did one other thing. Now, remember, I was at business school, and all of my friends were going to Wall Street to make $1 zillion.
Yep.
I was going to the television business where they weren't paying $1 zillion. I went to work at CBS as a financial analyst.
Okay.
I was being paid roughly half of what I was making when I left consulting as an economist.
Wow.
And I remember my father called me up and saying, "Now, how's this work? You just paid $1 zillion for, you know, school, and now you're making all this, you're making a lot less money." I said, "You know what, Dad? Trust me, I'm going to be okay, you know?" So I worked there for a year, and a friend of mine who was working there with me went to HBO, and he called me up and said, "Hey, Art, this place is unbelievable. It's great. You know, I got about 700 people here as opposed to CBS, which had about 7,000, you know." It was like a
Right. Yeah. You're
giant
one
place.
number.
And HBO at that point was like Netflix is now. That way, it was the cool television place to work.
Right.
They were going to change television, and that's what they were saying in the halls when they, we were changing television. Anyway, he says, Art, they need somebody to do subscriber forecasting and economic modeling, and you're the only guy in the business I know who knows anything about that.
Right, that's your wheelhouse at that point, right?
Right. Boom, I get a job at HBO. Now, of course, that was the last thing I wanted to be doing in the television business, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it was a foot in the door.
Foot in the door, exactly.
And I knew, and this is what I tell, when I talk to younger people about getting into television and everything, you're not going to get the job you want on day one. It's just very rare.
Right.
So whatever you do, get close to what you want to do. And HBO at that point, they were doing those 1 hour specials,
Yes.
Williams, uncut, Whoopi, the whole thing.
Yep.
So was this the mid 80s?
It was mid 80s.
Mid 80s. Because
Okay.
they kind of launched in, like, I remember them 79, 78.
Yeah, 76.
Or at least that's
actually.
when cable came to me.
76,
78,
they went up.
79, 80.
Yeah.
Okay. But this was the
76.
mid 80s. So they were, to what you were saying, they were really on a trajectory kind of where Netflix is now.
Right. And in the 80s, they were doing a lot of the young comedian all-star specials. They were doing the 1 hour specials. They had the stand-up spotlights. They had so many, the half-hour, comedy specials that they had at the time. They were doing a ton of stand-up.
Right.
And you know why? First of all, it plays great. But secondly, they didn't have to cut the stuff. They didn't have to censor it.
Right.
And you were
Exactly.
sort of the only game in town if you wanted to see Robin Williams do his act.
Or George, I'll never forget, one of the biggest inspirations to me was George Carlin at Carnegie Hall.
Oh, Carlin, man.
Carlin at Carnegie was just, I'm like, this is a job? This guy literally just points out stuff that I watch every day and realize every day.
You got to stop there on Carlin, because Carlin, when I was in 7th grade, I don't know how old you guys are. You're probably younger than me.
When
I was in 7th grade.
53.
Both 53.
Yeah. So you're younger than me. When I was in 7th grade, George Carlin, that album was like a brilliant seller. It was, everybody had it.
Yeah.
Right.
I listened to it with my brothers over and over. It was always on in our house.
Yep.
And we started talking like him. We were talking about impressions. I can't do it anymore.
Yeah.
We started talking like him. We started doing his routines, the whole thing.
Yep.
That's how we learned about comedy, from Carlin.
That's it.
And then Robert Klein, of course, came along. He was a big hero of mine. And I ended up doing a show with him at Comedy Channel, which was a great experience. But Carlin, man, big influence. I understand, and I probably shouldn't say this, but I understand from some friends in the business that they're doing a couple of movies about Carlin.
Are they really?
That's what I've heard too.
Makes sense.
Yeah, and I'm excited to see him because, man, he was like the beginning and the end, right?
I've said it before. The very first time I ever heard him do this one particular joke, I was just like, oh my God, how did he know that that's what I do? It's not even it's probably like a throwaway joke, but he always used to say, you ever go back and you're making a sandwich and you go to bread and you go back 3 or 4 slices to get to the good bread? Everyone does that. I'm like, how did he know I did that? And it was just those mundane things. And some of the biggest trouble I ever got in was repeating some of his jokes. We had cats in my house, and you pet the cat and his ass would go up, and his, from Carlin and Carnegie, oh my God, I hit the ass button. You'd start saying his stuff and, subsequently get in trouble.
And I think that, and I've said this before, I think I've learned some of my comedy timing by, and a lot of us, I think of our generation, is we listen to those albums, not cassette tapes or CDs, but the albums, and we'd go repeat the jokes to our friends in the same timing and cadence and everything as those guys did. Like you said, Art, you did the impression of him because you listened to it so much. We did the same thing. And I think in a way it ingrained a certain amount of comedic timing in telling a joke, so that when we started writing our own material, we kind of, at first, we all kind of adapt a style of somebody that we liked, and then we kind of incorporated in our own.
We've talked about it before, and, Cosby was another one that I grew up on his albums, and how many times did you go into class and tell the whole, I went to Catholic school, so telling the Noah story of building the ark and saying it exactly. Yes. I want you to build an ark, What? Right. And my friends would be, howling on the ground
Yeah.
laughing. And I'm
Yeah.
like, this is so much fun.
Yeah, no, everybody learned from those things.
Yeah.
Cosby, you got to put an asterisk next to his name.
I
now.
know.
It's
now
it's
it's
tough.
sad.
It's
It's really
tough to
sad.
admit because of everything that happened. But he, you go back to his albums and they did influence us. But
And then it makes you more sad at the fact that, he threw away that legacy, and his legacy
Yeah.
will never be what
I guess
we
that's
grew
true.
up knowing it to be.
I guess
No.
that's true. Anyway,
So,
we
but yeah.
digress.
We
digress.
digress. So
yes.
But, HBO, yes, HBO was the place for
Yeah.
uncut comedy, and
comedy.
they knew it, and they were having a field day doing that stuff. And I knew I was in the right place. One thing I didn't mention when I mentioned I was in business school and I wrote, I wrote the Follies and stuff. And when I
Mhm.
came out, I really wanted to work at a comedy network because it was, MTV and ESPN.
yep.
ESPN was showing, like girls' high school lacrosse games, but there it was, all sports all the time.
Right.
And there was, I said, well, why is there no comedy network? And that's when I started thinking about what it would look like, and all the comedy I loved,
Yeah.
all the guys I loved, and even the women comedians. There weren't as
Right.
many in those days, but I just wanted, and not only that, but just the old time comedy,
Mhm.
Abbott and Costello, which was a big influence, on Seinfeld
Oh
and
my
his show.
God.
All those things that I loved so much about comedy and watched. I said, why can't they have a channel devoted to that stuff plus stand up? And they
Yep.
didn't. And that's when I started thinking about it. Anyway, so I went to HBO and I did like 2 years of subscriber forecasting, which was not that much fun, but I got to say, I worked very hard on it, knowing that if I worked hard, somebody noticed me. And that's what happened. I got a better job. But I was nowhere near programming and nowhere near comedy, but at least I had some friends now in programming.
Mhm.
I would mention to them occasionally, hey, you got to do a comedy channel, don't you think? And they'd say, yeah, good idea, but it'll never happen. I said, why not? And they'd say, because of the following. And, I'd hear all their objections. And so
Yeah.
after a while, I knew what the objections were going to be.
Right.
So one day I pulled myself together and I said, you know what? I'm going to pitch this to the head of HBO programming.
Wow.
I know. And, her name was Bridget. She was at the very top of the org chart. I was at pretty much the very bottom of the org chart.
Right.
So, I look back on it and say, how did I have the guts to do that? But
To
I
do
called-
it.
I called up and I said, I want to go talk to Bridget about an idea I have. And she said, okay, come on down. So I go down there and I say, hey, Bridget, HBO does a lot of comedy. I think we should do an all comedy network 24/7.
Mhm.
She said, stop right there. It'll never work. That's a terrible idea. And let me tell you why. 15 minutes she talked and told me why it was a terrible idea.
Yep.
And I'm just sitting there. And then she ends with, and you're new at television. You don't know anything about television.
Yep.
So thanks for dropping by.
Wow.
And I walked
Now,
out. I
Did
walked
she
out.
bring up any objections that you hadn't already heard? Or
Well, you know
were
what?
they
Yes.
pretty much the same
Yes.
ones?
No. There was one objection that I had me scratching my head.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, do you think that any A-list comedian would be on an all comedy channel? And I said,
Huh.
I didn't say anything because I wasn't allowed to talk, but
Yeah.
I said, then she says, would Robin, Whoopi, Billy, would those guys would their managers let them be on an all? No. And I'm thinking, why not?
I was just going to say that. Why
Yeah,
not?
right.
Mick Jagger's on MTV. Why wouldn't
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
An all music channel. Right.
The other thing she pointed out, there were some good points. Like it's expensive.
Yeah.
Comedy's expensive. You guys know that. Writers are expensive. But anyway, so she pretty much threw a big tanker truck full of ice water on me and my idea.
Yeah.
But I went back to my office and I knew she was wrong. I just, in my heart, I knew somebody was going to start a comedy network and it should be us. So I kept working on it, writing things up, doing financial spreadsheets. And then one day my boss's boss said, what are you working on so hard? And I said, I'm just doing it was at lunch or something. I said, I'm just working on this idea I had. He said, what is it? So I, showed it to him. He says, this is great. The chairman of HBO should see this.
So Bridget,
And I said, wow, the chairman? That's one above Bridget, you know?
Right. Yeah.
And the chairman of HBO, his name was Michael Fuchs. He had just been named the most powerful man in Hollywood by the New York Times like 2 weeks earlier. This is a guy, if I got in the elevator with Michael Fuchs accidentally, I broke into a flop sweat. I mean, because this guy, he could snap his finger. If I hit the wrong button, he'd say, okay, you're fired. You'll never work in the business again.
That's
And
what I
he
was
could
thinking.
make a
You're
stick.
nervous just asking him what floor he wants to go on and not screwing up the buttons. Right.
Anyway, so my boss's boss says, come on, we're going to go see Michael. I said, when? He says, right now. I said, I can't go right now. I have no presentation materials. I don't know we go in to see Michael. Michael says, what do you want? You didn't make an appointment. What do you want? He's like kind of edgy, you know?
Yeah. Oof.
And so my boss's name was Larry. He said, well, Art has a great idea and he wants to pitch it to you right now. I know.
You see the bus coming?
Well, what could I do? What could I do? Right? You're
Nothing.
in the spot.
You got to present
on the
it.
spot. I gave him the pitch. I put every bit of passion I could into it. I was like really selling, and I put some vision in too. I said, you know what? If this works, we'll be the center of the comedy universe.
Yeah.
And I think he liked that. He wanted to be king of comedy.
Right.
Because he loved comedy.
Yeah.
And so he didn't say, yeah, okay, let's do it. He said, okay, let's explore. And that's how we got started.
Wow.
That's how we got started.
Wow.
I know.
Talk about being thrown right into the fire, man.
You got to be ready.
So
you're right, because you don't know when that opportunity is going to present itself.
Yeah.
And you know, they don't come often, so you got to grasp it and just kind of go with it. But you knew that this idea could work.
Right.
You know, and you never gave up on it. And so I think that's why you were ready when that moment finally presented itself.
So let me ask you this, because I'm in sales, and when I hear objection, I try and think of how to overcome that objection.
Right.
Had you already put some thought into, okay, these are all valid concerns and objections that I've heard from different people, as well as Bridget. Had you put some thought into how to overcome them? Like, well, here's a way around this, or here's a way to address this in case.
Of course.
Yeah.
And one of the big questions was, how do you do a comedy channel? How do you do it inexpensively to start? Not forever, but to start.
Right.
And one of the things that I said was, we're going to do it like MTV. We are going to get clips from funny movies, from stand-up comics, from everything we can, from all the comedy specials. If you have a clip that's under 3 minutes, according to the guilds, you can show it on a promotional basis. And that's what we're going to do. And then we're also going to have movies and shows and everything else. But that was going to be our start, a big part of our start. And I said, that stuff's free. All we have to do is produce it, you know?
Right.
And Michael was kind of intrigued by that. So that is how we got started.
And now when we're talking about how you got started, because so I started comedy. I started my first open mic was in 1989. Yeah. And it was right at the tail end of the big comedy boom. And at the time, it was the Comedy Channel.
Right.
Right.
Okay. So
is that what you started? Was the Comedy Channel?
I started the Comedy Channel. It later became Comedy Central, and I'll tell you how that happened.
Yeah, because I think I heard about that, but I want to hear it.
I was going to say,
obviously we've got the horse's mouth here. So
what year was it that you presented this and it started to take off?
88.
88. Okay.
Yeah. And you're right. The comedy boom, I didn't think it was ending around then, but it sure was booming. I mean, Caroline's had just started, Caroline's Comedy Club.
Yeah.
But we started, and, what are you going to name a comedy channel? Name it the Comedy Channel. So that's what we did. And we got it out there. And, it's all in the book, but everything went wrong before we launched. I mean, everything went wrong. All the clips that we thought we were going to have, we couldn't have them because the Directors Guild, one of the guilds said, you know what? We changed our mind. We don't want you to show those things promotionally. We want you to pay for them. And it's like, we don't have that kind of scratch, guys.
Right.
And that was it. So like this giant pile of programming I had in the closet behind me, couldn't use it.
Fell apart.
So we had to launch without it. But some things did go right. And one of the big things I pointed out that went right, even before we launched the Comedy Channel, we got a tape in the mail. And we opened the mail, and the tape was Mystery Science Theater 3000. And there was a note with it, and it said, "Hey, we hear you guys are doing a comedy channel. Is this something you might be interested in?" And we're like,
Yeah.
It was so good. We flew out to Minneapolis the next day because that's where they were. They were making it at this little failed UHF television station. They were just doing it for fun.
Wow.
And I thought at
what's
that
his
time,
last name?
I thought at that time, Joel Hodgson. I thought at that time, if great comedy is going to find us, we're going to be successful. And that's what happened even before we launched.
Right.
So that was a good thing. And we, believe me, we used MST 3000 for the first 6 months as like, hey, at least we got this as a hit, because it was
At least we got something,
instantly a
right?
hit. Yeah. But I went to work every day the first year thinking they were going to shut us down. That's how bad things were going. I don't know if you remember. I mean, if you were in comedy in '89, you might remember when we launched, we were savaged by the press. They said, it's not funny. What do they think they're doing? Michael Fuchs is falling flat on his face. I think there was a little payback there.
Yeah.
Named the most powerful guy in Hollywood.
Right.
But anyway, we were savaged. And
Jeez.
I just had to go to work every day. People say, well, how'd you keep going to work? I went to work every day saying, okay, what can we do more of that's working? And what can we do less of that's not working? That was like my whole job.
Right.
I was actually glad they gave me a job at the channel because I knew nothing about the comedy business.
Right.
I mean, zero. When this thing started, and I was made one of the comedy programmers, and the guy who was also a programmer was the head comedy programmer at HBO. His name was Stu Smiley.
Yeah.
You remember Stu?
Yeah.
Great guy. First thing he said to me, he didn't say, "Hi, Art, how you doing?" He said, "What do you know about comedy?"
Yep.
And he didn't say it nicely. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And then I realized, this is a club you got to kind of break into.
Yeah,
Right. Here's a guy,
It's true.
who's probably devoted his whole life to comedy. Now some guy who's not in comedy comes up and starts a channel.
Right. So I was not embraced with open arms. It wasn't the kind of thing where Stu was saying, "Hey, kid, stick with me. Do everything I do."
Take you under his wing. Right. He wasn't like that.
Yeah.
But you know what? We ended up getting along. We did a lot of good stuff together. And
Awesome.
we did the channel for a year.
Yeah.
Halfway through the year, we got competition. MTV Networks launched Ha.
So it was
Comedy
MTV that launched Ha.
MTV Networks, because the funny thing is, and it made me laugh and cry at the same time, because like I didn't need competition on top of everything else.
Right.
Enough problems. But I said, hey, like a year ago there were no comedy channels in the world. Now there's going to be 2. Anyway, so Ha comes along, and it was the comedy wars. We were going head to head. We were fighting for talent, comedians, programming, advertisers, everything, distribution. At the end of that year, the powers that be, Michael Fuchs, the chairman of HBO, and the chairman of Viacom, who owned MTV, they got together and they said, "We're going to kill each other. Let's just merge them." And that's what they did. I got a phone call. We're merging the channels. And at that point, I thought, okay, I'm probably going to get fired like everybody else, because you know what happens in mergers. They fire.
Consolidations.
Right.
Yeah, right.
So they did fire a lot of people, but they did not fire me. They put me in a room with the head of programming from the Ha channel. His name was Mike Klinghoffer, and he's still around. And he and they said, "You guys figure out what this channel is going to be. Figure out who you want from, for staff. Figure out what kind of programming, and you got to rename it, because you can't call it the Comedy Channel. You can't call it Ha. That would imply somebody won the Comedy Wars.
Oh,
So we had to rename the thing, and we came up with Comedy Central. Anyway, it's all in the book.
No, that's awesome. Because I had always heard that it had to change the name and again, I was a low-level comic, still am, but I had heard that the name change was because there was some Canadian station that already had the Comedy Channel name, and so it had to be changed. I didn't realize that, because I was on. So this is how you guys helped comics, probably just as a result of needing content. You guys used to go around the country and go into comedy clubs, or say to a comedy club, "We're going to bring in," and in my night, it was Rich Hall from
Yeah, he was an early.
Not necessarily the news.
Right.
He did
right.
Sniglets, and
Right.
that's what he was known for.
Right.
But he was the headliner, and they held a contest at the local comedy club Periwinkles, which was in Providence, Rhode Island. They held a contest. They took the top 9 comics from those contests throughout a couple of month period, plus the 3 people who were already hosts at those shows. And they put together a showcase of 12 of us. We each had 6 minutes. And then Rich Hall closed the show. And then they took those clips, and then it was on Short Attention Span Theater and Stand Up. Tommy Koenig and Wally Collins, I believe,
Wally Collins is
were the
exactly
hosts.
right. Yeah.
Right. So and so then they would take a clip, and I've said it before on the show, you know, hey, we've got a bunch of people talking about going to Catholic school, and then all of a sudden there'd be a 3-minute clip of me, or you know, a couple of 3 or 4 people talking about going to Catholic school.
Yep.
And
Covering the same subject.
a similar subject.
Yep.
And it was
Yep.
genius. But what it did for us was it gave us that first TV credit that maybe wasn't getting on Carson. But you know what? To be able to say you were on the Comedy Channel, I think I was thinking as you were talking in the other room, I'm a big pack rat. So in the other room, I probably still have the souvenir painter's cap that says the Comedy Channel
I'm
on it
sure you
that
do.
I got the night of the show.
I'm sure you
I
do.
know on my website, I actually have the set list, and it says the Comedy Channel showcase Periwinkles. And I think it was like 1991 that
Yeah.
we did it.
And we
But,
did that. And stand up actually went to Comedy Central.
Yeah.
Short Attention Span Theater did for a little while. You didn't mention one of the big hosts of Short Attention Span Theater, the earliest host,
who
Jon
was it?
Stewart.
Was it really?
Wow, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he had been on HBO, but he wasn't.
you're right.
He was a long way from a household name.
Yeah.
And I tell some stories about him. He was a great guy. I mean, he was just I don't know if you
I
ever
got to
met him.
work with him years later at the Comedy
Right.
Connection
Just such a nice
in
guy.
Boston. Such an awesome guy.
And
And
for
one of the few guys that's shorter than me.
and for any of our listeners, if you guys are interested in
Yes.
taking a deeper dive into this story, I'm going to put a link to the book in today's show notes. So you definitely can click on that.
Gotta check it
Click
out.
on that and check out this book because it's an amazing story. You know, we obviously for comedians, Comedy Central is huge, and
Yeah.
you know, Ace has mentioned that contest and his chance back in the day at Periwinkles. So, you know, definitely some backstory there. But yeah, definitely go to the show notes today if you want to get a copy of that book and
And it's
take a much deeper dive into the story.
and it's available both in regular book and then audio book. I watched.
Yeah, I
you
just
had
did
it
the
up on
audiobook.
site. Did
I
you?
narrate the audiobook.
Oh, that's
very
awesome.
cool.
Yeah, it is cool. It is cool.
Very cool.
I thought it would be good. So if you want to hear 8 hours of me talking,
Yeah.
Who does it?
Yeah, but with a
Who
voice.
doesn't?
Yeah, but you have your voice in the audio book. That's
Yeah.
probably why you don't have it now. How long ago did you do the book?
over the summer, I did it
Oh,
over the
all right.
summer.
I guess.
Well, Ace is getting ready to narrate a book.
Yeah.
He did
Is
an
that right?
independent film back a while ago, and the director,
the book never went anywhere, but the director,
The
just
movie
wrote-
never went
I mean, the
anywhere.
movie never went anywhere,
the
right?
director just wrote a book about the making of the movie, and they want Ace to narrate
great.
the audiobook. So he's going to do that as well. So
Let me just say,
Ah.
it's harder than it looks.
Yeah, I know.
yeah, it's not just sitting talking for a little while.
No.
right?
Well, and
It's
that's
not like-
that's one of the things I told him because the publisher originally hired someone. He wasn't crazy about the audition. Then they asked him, "Well, do you want to do it?" And then he did it. And I said, "Nick, it sounds like you're just kind of trying to get through the words. Like you have to make believe like all your nieces and nephews are around you saying, 'Uncle Nick, tell us about the time you made that movie.'" And read it like story time. So that's when he said, "Well, would you do a reading for it?" And I did, and ended up, and yeah, they liked it. So,
Yeah.
so
Now, do you have another book besides the Constant Comedy Central book, right?
I'm working on another book. Vinny and I wrote a book back in Comedy Central days.
Okay.
It was called Web Sightings,
Okay.
yeah, it's on-
collection of
it's on-
websites we'd like to see. And that what happened is I was at comedy for about 8 years. Then they replaced top management, which included Vinny and me,
Okay.
but they didn't fire us right away. They told us, you guys are in charge. They told me I'm in charge of new business development. Then Vinny shows up
Mhm.
and they said, you guys can do the website, because like nobody knew what that meant. Like, what's a
Right,
website? I mean,
At that
seriously,
time, yeah.
you gotta go back then. That's the mid 90s. It was
Right.
just starting up. And we thought we made the first Comedy Central website, and we made it funny.
Yeah.
We got a radio comedian working on it,
Yep.
and writers, and we made it really funny, and it got really popular. Now, I don't even think they do that anymore, but we had so much fun. And then we decided to do this book because there was so many weird websites popping up, like every kind of website you can imagine. And we'd have some fun with that. So yeah, we did that book. It was
So
cool.
writing that website must have brought you back to the Follies days of writing satire, right?
Right. It was, I got to write comedy again. I mean, I always wrote a little bit wherever I was, but there I was writing comedy for the web, and I was with actual comedy writers. And every once in a while they'd say, Art, that is so not funny. And I'd say, no, it's really funny. We're not using that. We're not doing that. Okay. It's not funny. So, listen, when you get in the ring with professionals,
and we've been lucky enough to speak to some, very big professional comedy writers. The head writer from Conan was on just before Conan went off the air with us. And, those guys, that's a muscle, a skill that is just unbelievable. I mean, we write
to do that
we write
every
for
day.
ourselves, but to sit there and come up with 100 jokes a day, every single day, and just to crank out material like that and everything, that's another skill set. And nothing but respect for those guys. Yeah, it's a lot more work than people realize.
I always say that. To get a good 5 minutes, you know what it takes. Get about 10
absolutely.
minutes, like 6 months of work.
I tell people that all the time. When you go to a comedy show and you see a guy standing up there that looks like he's just talking and looks like he's making that up off the top of his head, that guy is so good at what he does to make it look like that.
Right.
He has.
It looks like it's coming off the top of their head.
Yeah,
exactly. But they've worked on that for a long time.
They know every step they take on stage. They know exactly which hand the microphone's going to be in for every joke, where they're going to take their pauses. They know everything about everything to do with that, but it looks so in the moment and spontaneous, and that's what a true professional is. So nothing but respect for people that do that. So 8 years you said total with and it was
the first 8 years of Comedy Central. And again, we weren't, I think the heavy betting when they merged us was we weren't going to make it through the year.
Really?
Because why would they think we would? It was two competing groups of people.
Yeah, probably thought you were going to eat each other alive,
exactly.
right?
And they weren't really, listen, we didn't exactly, the two of us, we weren't Comedy Channel, we weren't breakout, shot out of the cannon successes.
You were still growing in your own markets, right?
There was no proof of concept that a Comedy Channel could actually work yet.
Right.
But when we got together, Mike and I and all the people we hired and everything, we realized pretty quickly that we all wanted the same thing. We wanted a comedy network in the world that would work, that would be the center of the comedy universe. And that's what we did. We worked hard. And I really made sure I was not going to let this thing die on my watch. I mean, it was the only job I ever had, and I had a bunch after and before, where I felt personally responsible
right
for the situation. Even though almost immediately we had hundreds of people working on the thing. It wasn't all me all the time. Believe me. But I did feel personally responsible for it.
Well,
you talk about that in the book.
Right. And you pitched it, you brought it up, and it kind of started with you. And so, of course you're going to feel that way. Now, whenever we have comedians or performers on, one of the questions we like to ask them is about during their career, any wow moments that they've had as far as, working with somebody that they've always wanted to work with, or working at a place. Yeah. Now, working on, the Comedy Channel, then, merging with Ha and Comedy Central, and being the comedy fan that you were, did you ever get a chance to work with any of these performers that you were like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm here with this guy right now, or this performer right now, or this person right now?
Yeah, actually, it's something it's one of the things I did not put in the book. But when I was in college, the hottest comic in America was Robert Klein.
Oh God.
And I saw Robert Klein at Bryn Mawr. I saw him in a million different places, right?
Yeah.
When I got to Comedy Channel, I wanted to do a show. I was kind of pushing for it on classic comedy. Remember we talked about that a little bit? Because, like, man, you see Buster Keaton now and the stuff that he's doing. You see Chaplin. I mean, if you're really into comedy, those guys are just unbelievable what they did and how they did it. So, as it turns out, we got Robert Klein to do the narration.
Oh,
so there's Art Bell in the booth with Robert Klein for hours and hours. Yeah. Just, not only were we talking about the comedy, and not only was he reading the narration, but we're just having a great time talking about comedy. It was actually not a great time for Robert Klein. He was getting divorced at that point.
Oh, really?
So, he's a little down, but man, it was just so much fun watching comedy with him, and so much fun that the script was all about how these guys got started, like Buster Keaton. I don't know if you know the story of how he got started. He was in vaudeville. His parents were in vaudeville. When he was 4 years old, they'd take him up on stage and they'd swing him back and forth and they'd launch him into the audience.
Oh my God! Seriously, he was the original stage diver.
They catch him, right? And that's how Buster Keaton got to be the world's greatest stunt guy, comedy stunt guy, right? That's his stuff. But anyway, the stories like that, they were just great. There were just a million stories, and yes, I got to work with Robert Klein. It was a dream come true.
Yeah, that's I got to meet him once at Catch a Rising Star when it was here in Rhode Island, and it was one of those moments when you meet someone that's a hero, where you just try as another comedian. I just tried not to be a super fanboy or fall on my face. I just tried to be nice to meet you, sir, and talk to him. And he just turned out to be another comedian and just had a nice conversation and couldn't have been a nicer person. And it was so nice that he didn't turn out to be a bad, he didn't destroy the myth of who he was in that moment when you got to meet a hero, which was great. He and then you watch him go out there and perform, and, us young guys go out first and we think we're lighting the world on fire. And here's this, consummate professional that just destroys the place. And you're like, okay, we're nowhere near that yet. I don't know if I could ever be that good, but and then he comes off stage and he's just Robert Klein again, just nice guy, just unbelievable. So I know
he's an amazing guy. Yeah, that was a treat. There's one other you didn't ask. Some people ask me, like, what was the coolest pitch you ever took?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. Yeah.
And the coolest pitch I ever took, I can't remember what the pitch was, because it was Bobcat Goldthwait, who I loved.
Yes.
I mean,
huge fans. Huge fans.
Yeah. So don't get me started. That's one of my impressions.
That's one of Ace's impressions are.
Well, you do Bobcat. Well, he's kind of easy,
Yeah. A lot of people do him.
Yeah. Anyway, so Bobcat is coming in and I'm saying, I'm going to be at that meeting. So I'm at the meeting, right? And Bobcat starts pitching this idea. Again, I don't know what it was. It was completely off the wall, but he was so funny. I could not stop laughing. And, it's like you said, you want to meet these guys. You want to be, a consummate professional. Oh, that is funny, Bobcat. No, I was just hysterical.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
I was sliding off my chair. And to this day, I can't remember what it was he pitched. Right. We didn't do it, but
you just remember it was funny. Right.
It was, he was just so funny in the room. I couldn't believe it.
Well, see, and that's the thing, just from talking to you for the past, 53 minutes, almost 54, just knowing that you were a fan of comedy, just like we were. We all got into comedy because we were a fan. And why not bring that in a condensed format to people? When you brought up Abbott and Costello, I don't know if you noticed, but I lit up because I just the other night, a couple of years ago, I was like, my favorite Abbott and Costello was Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. And that was one I remember every Sunday morning on the local UHF channel at 8:00 before we went to church. we watched Abbott and Costello movies, and that one was one of my favorites, and Hold That Ghost was the other favorite. And I just watched it literally last weekend, and I laughed just as hard as I did when I was a kid.
I remember their
Because it's
TV
just
show.
so funny.
I used to watch their TV
Yeah.
show all
TV
the
show.
time and I laughed my ass off. I loved their TV show.
Yeah, Seinfeld, he said that he modeled a lot of his show after that show. Did you know
Yeah.
that?
Well, because it was a lot of quick cadence jokes, or quick cadence, the way that they were delivered.
Right.
Similar, very,
It was
very.
and it was about stupid stuff.
and it was
Mundane.
right.
Yeah, about mundane
stuff.
subjects, but they would make them very funny.
See,
Right.
now, it just reminded me that we did an Abbott and Costello marathon. We started doing marathons,
Really?
Yeah.
and we got Jerry Seinfeld to host it
Really?
because he loved it. I think that was
'Cause he
even
loved them
before
so
his
much.
show, or his show had just started.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's what was cool about Comedy Central, especially in the old days, in the early days, because it was like kind of an explosion of creativity. We were making it up,
Right.
like, hey, that worked. Let's do more of it. Let's do it better. Let's hire somebody else, And
Well, like I said, I don't think before you guys came along, anyone had ever shown the light on, yes, Whoopi, and Billy, and Robin, and all these national comics. But did you know that there are local comics in your own town that are funny? They're just not famous. They're very, very funny. And so the fact that you guys shone a light on local talent was just, to me, that was groundbreaking and so different than what anyone else had ever done.
Right. And plus, you guys had an empty canvas. You guys were like you said, you were kind of doing it as you went along, putting this stuff together. So you had an empty canvas to paint
Right.
on.
We got to try everything. Actually,
Right.
Vinny actually came up with this idea. We had a group called the Buzz Committee, and we had to come up with crazy ideas all the time. And Vinny said, "Hey, you know what MST 3000 does? Let's do that for the presidential State of the Union address live." And I said, "No." He said, "Yeah." He said, "Yeah, let's do that." And I said, "It'll never work because the president's talking." He says, "Oh man, there's so many applause lines and everything. Let's just try it."
Right.
So we did it. And we did it. We got Al Franken to host it the first.
Wow. Perfect.
And it was, and Al didn't, you talk about a blank canvas, rather.
Canvas.
He had no idea. He said, "What do you want me to do?"
Yeah. As it's going along, you don't have the speech in front of you beforehand, right?
And this guy's used to doing live because he was on Saturday Night Live.
Right,
And it
right.
was just, he said it was really one of the craziest things he ever had to do. And he was great. It was so funny.
Yeah.
And remember I told you the press hated us when we first launched Comedy Channel? This was Comedy Central. It was 1992. It was the first time we got notices like, hey, these guys are really figuring it out over there at Comedy Central. They're really doing some interesting stuff.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Take a look.
Well,
And that was a big moment for us.
and I don't know anyone. The first time I ever saw, obviously, I'm sure there were political humorists and political comics before, but the first time I ever saw them was on Comedy Central in the Comedy Channel, like Will Durst. We just had Jimmy Tingle on last year. And, that was the first time I had been exposed to political comedy. That's actually how I learned about politics, was the hypocrisy and the craziness of what goes on through the lens of a comic.
Well, that's what we did. I mean, I talked about when we tried to capitalize on our successes. Of course, we did that every year.
Yeah.
But we also covered the conventions. And Jon Stewart was
That's right. Jon Stewart was
he was the correspondent covering.
I do
the
remember
conventions.
those.
And that was the first big step towards the Daily Show, because we realized that that kind of stuff plays.
Now we ask performers that are on here for our what's become one of our favorite segments and our fans' favorite segments.
It's usually how we wrap up the show. So
Right.
But first of all, we want to thank you for your time and the fact that you don't have a voice, to be able to talk to us. But
Yeah.
one last question.
One last question.
Okay.
We would call it, with comedians, called the funny bad gig story. And this was always, for comedians, it's a gig that was so bad that made you say, well, maybe Enterprise Rent-A-Car is hiring. And maybe I want to leave this business and do something else. Now, running a comedy channel and being the first comedy channel, there must have been moments where maybe an idea was pitched, or maybe you did something that you just bombed terribly and you were thinking, yeah, that's it for us.
Yeah.
Maybe I can go back to being an economist, you know, or something like that. There's got to be one of those in the arsenal that happened in that time.
You know, it's funny. I tend to remember the successes, but
We all do. We
Yeah.
don't want to remember the
Try
bad
and push the
moments.
other- yeah,
but
the other ones away.
if you've been around comedy art, you know comedians love the uncomfortable stories.
yeah.
okay. So here's an uncomfortable story. It's not. I was there. We were doing the State of the Union address.
Mhm.
Okay.
Dennis Miller was the host. I'm sitting
Perfect.
in the green room with our head of talent, Lori Zacks, maybe a name you know, and the speech went on forever.
Mhm.
And Dennis was very funny, but he had to go to the bathroom and it was live and he didn't know what to do. And so finally he started saying, you know what? I'm going to have to take a break one way or the other here. I got to go. I just, nature's calling, you know?
Yeah.
And at that point, Lori, you know, it's like, what's going on? Dennis stands up. He walks off the set. He's all alone.
He's
He
the
walks
only
off
one.
the set. He's still mic'd. He goes out into the hall and he pees in a garbage can.
No. Oh my God.
And
that's
to be
awesome.
like the Euphrates River.
Yeah. Hey, listen,
And
Papa
then,
Ganoush. Nature
Without
calls.
missing a beat, he goes back in, finishes the show. It's great. And I mean, she's at the end of it, he comes running out and he goes, I just killed my career. And he meant it. He was
Yeah,
so
he really thought he
beside,
did, right.
Just killed my career. And I'm standing there saying, no, Dennis, you were great, man. It was nobody noticed. He said, I went to the
Nobody- I
bathroom
peed in a
on
can."
national TV. I said, yeah, but it was audio only. There was no camera on it. People didn't really know what was going on. And I tell the story in the book. I'm telling it funny now, but it's the way I tell in the book is funnier.
Yeah.
And I just want to mention, just to plug the book, because I got to plug the
We're
book.
gonna,
right?
Oh,
we're gonna
that
put it on
definitely.
too.
I told a few stories from the book, but of course there's a million of them in there.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's the whole story of how we got started, how it was really hard, how I ultimately ended up getting fired after 8 years
Wow.
from the channel that I had started. And just, you know, I said the subtitle is, you know, how I lost my sense of humor. I just wanted to point out to people it was hard. It
Yeah.
was really hard to get that thing going. And a lot of people didn't think it was going to make it. So
Well, just because it's about a light topic of comedy doesn't mean there's not. And that's honestly, that's basically what our podcast is about, behind the funny. And sometimes what's behind the funny is not so funny. There's a lot of times there's tragedy and diversity or adversity behind the funny. And so this is a perfect story that ties in with it. So,
Yeah.
so let's plug the book again.
Constant Comedy, how I started Comedy Central
I got a
and
copy.
lost my sense of humor.
Excuse me. I need to show it. There it is.
And he's
There you
showing it
go.
right there.
There's the book. There is going to be a link in the show notes. So click on your show notes if you're listening to the podcast right now and get yourself a copy of the book. He gave you some of the stories that are included in the book tonight, but there's a much deeper dive, obviously, with the book.
With the book, yeah.
And go really, really deep behind the scenes of how this all, the comedy channel started, and you know, some of the great stories that went with that.
And I mean, listen, obviously we just went an hour with Art and he said that he narrated this book for 18 hours. So, you know, there's way more information in there and
Eight
funny
hours.
stories.
8 hours.
Oh, I
It was
thought
eight-
you said
I
18.
thought he said 18
I
too.
thought you said 18.
No, eight.
All right, still.
eight.
It's eight times.
Yeah.
There's 8 times as much stories in there than
Yeah.
there is, you know, than what we were able to
Yeah,
cover on the
but-
podcast. But this was a great way to kind of get a taste of what is in the book. And really, I mean, I want to get it. and
I can't
wanna
wait to
read
read
it.
the book.
So
Read the
Oh,
book, definitely.
well,
that's
Tell me how you
awesome.
like it after you read it. I want to hear from
Absolutely.
We definitely will.
Absolutely are.
you. All right, great.
So listen, we really appreciate you being on. We're like we said, this will be on audio versions of the podcast by next Thursday. It'll drop.
Okay.
We'll make sure we promote it. We'll tag you and let you know about it as well. But we can't thank you enough for being on and reaching out in the first
Oh, it was my
place.
pleasure.
So,
I had a lot of
so
fun. A lot
listen,
of fun tonight.
thanks so much, Art. We'll be in touch soon.
Great.
All
Good to
right.
see you guys.
Thank you, Art.
Thanks, man.
Bye-bye.
Have a great night.
Good night.
All right.
And that was Art Bell, everybody.
Yes.
Again,
So awesome.
Author of Constant Comedy, How I Started Comedy Central and Lost My Sense of Humor. Great book. Make sure you support him and pick that up. And of course, the podcast where you discovered him and where you tune in and listen to us. You can support us by telling a friend, subscribing if you haven't subscribed. Why haven't you subscribed?
Yeah. If you're just listening every week,
now,
subscribe to the damn thing.
Yeah. If you listen every week, just subscribe.
Yeah.
It makes it easier. But definitely give us a quick 5-star review wherever you download your podcast. That's a great way to support us. And, other than that,
we will see you
next week.